parents gave my brother the family vacation home, the house I grew up spending every summer in. He sent me a list of approved visit dates. I read it twice. Then I blocked his number. 6 months later, Mom called asking why I skipped Thanksgiving. My name's Oliver. I'm 34, and I need to tell you about the time my family decided I was a guest in my own history. Not a metaphor. I mean, they literally tried to schedule me into the house I grew up spending every summer of my life in, like I was booking a timeshare in Branson, Missouri. Let me back up. I grew up in a pretty standard middle-class family in western Pennsylvania. My parents, Jean and Loretta, had 2 boys. There was me, the older one, and my younger brother, Sutton, 2 years apart. Now, growing up, I always knew Sutton was the favorite. I don't say that with bitterness. I say it the way you'd say water is wet. It was just a fact of our household. Sutton was funnier. Sutton was more outgoing. Sutton played baseball, and my dad lived for baseball. I played chess and read science fiction novels, which in my father's eyes was roughly equivalent to collecting dryer lint as a hobby. Don't get me wrong, Sutton's not a bad person. At least he didn't used to be. He was my brother, and I loved him, and we had plenty of good times growing up. It's just that somewhere along the line, the family decided he was the main character and I was part of the supporting cast. And once that gets established, it's really hard to rewrite the script. But here's the thing. I wasn't some sad, overlooked kid crying into his pillow every night. I had a good childhood. My parents weren't monsters. They came to my stuff when it mattered. They fed me. They told me they loved me. It's just that when Sutton walked into a room, the thermostat in my parents' hearts went up about 15 degrees. You know those families where one kid is the sun and the other kid is a nice lamp in the corner? I was the lamp. Functional. Appreciated. But nobody's writing poems about a lamp. The one place where none of that mattered was the lake house. My grandparents on my mom's side, Hank and Della, owned a beautiful 3-bedroom cabin on Raystown Lake. It wasn't fancy. The porch leaned a little to the left. The kitchen had avocado green appliances from roughly the Carter administration, and there was a dock out back that creaked like it was auditioning for a horror movie. But it was paradise. Every summer from the time I could walk until I was 18, we spent 3 weeks at that house. And I mean real summers. Catching bluegill off the dock at sunrise, eating peanut butter sandwiches on the porch, falling asleep to the sound of frogs, and my grandfather snoring through the screen door. Grandpa Hank was my person. He didn't care that I wasn't athletic. He taught me how to tie fishing knots, how to identify trees by their bark, how to sit still long enough that the herons would come close. He told me once, when I was about 12, that the lake house would always be there for me. He said it like a promise. And I believed him, because Hank was the kind of man whose word was something you could build a house on. When I was 22, Grandma Della passed. Grandpa Hank held on for another 4 years, but the light went out of him slowly, like a lantern running out of oil. He passed when I was 26. I drove up to the lake house the day after his funeral and sat on that creaky dock for 3 hours, just watching the water. I didn't cry. I just sat there and let the place hold me. In his will, Hank left the lake house to my mom, Loretta. That made sense. She was his only child. And for a few years, nothing changed. We all still went up in the summer. I'd take a week off work. Sutton would come up with whoever he was dating at the time. My parents would be there the whole month of July. It was the one tradition that still felt like family to me. Then things started shifting. Sutton got married to a woman named Jolene. Jolene was fine. I don't have anything terrible to say about her. She was one of those people who was always perfectly pleasant to your face, and then you'd hear later that she'd made some comment about your shoes or your apartment or the fact that you brought store-bought coleslaw to the cookout. She had opinions about everything and the subtlety of a fire alarm. But whatever, she made Sutton happy, and that was enough for me. What I didn't realize was that Jolene had been working on my parents, specifically my mother. See, Jolene came from a family where property meant everything. Her parents owned rental homes, her uncle flipped houses, her whole family spoke in terms of equity and assets and appreciation. And Jolene saw the lake house the way a real estate investor sees a teardown in a hot zip code. Not as a family memory, as an opportunity. About a year after the wedding, my mom started dropping hints. Little things. She'd say how nice it was that Sutton and Jolene were thinking about their future. How responsible Sutton was being about finances. How the lake house really needed someone who could take care of it full-time. I didn't think much of it. I was busy. I'd just gotten a promotion at the engineering firm where I worked. I was dating a woman named Waverly who I was pretty sure I was going to marry, and honestly, I figured the lake house would just keep being the lake house. Shared. Ours. The way Grandpa Hank intended. Then one Sunday in October, my parents invited me and Sutton over for dinner. Hot roast, mashed potatoes, the whole deal. My mom even made her lemon meringue pie, which she only makes when she's either celebrating something or about to deliver news she knows you won't like. I should have read the pie as the warning sign it was. After dinner, my dad cleared his throat in that way he does when he's about to say something he's rehearsed. Gene is not a man of many words, so when he lines up a speech, you know it's been workshopped. He told us that he and Mom had decided to transfer ownership of the lake house to Sutton. Not to both of us. To Sutton. He said it was because Sutton and Jolene were planning to start a family, and they wanted to make sure the house stayed in good hands, and that Sutton had expressed interest in doing some renovations. I sat there with a forkful of pie halfway to my mouth. I looked at Sutton. He was nodding, not surprised. He already knew. Jolene was sitting next to him with this little smile that I can only describe as the face of someone who just won a hand of poker she'd been playing for 2 years. I put the fork down. I asked my mom if this was what Grandpa Hank would have wanted. She got that pinched look she gets when you say something she doesn't want to deal with, and said, "Your grandfather left the house to me, Oliver. It was my decision to make." And technically, she was right. Legally, it was hers. But morally, emotionally, that house belonged to all of us. It was the one thing in our family that was supposed to be equal, and they just handed it to Sutton like I was some distant cousin they saw at Thanksgiving. I didn't make a scene. I finished my pie. I hugged my mom on the way out. I drove home, and I sat in my driveway for about 15 minutes, staring at the steering wheel, trying to figure out when exactly I became the kind of person my family could just subtract from the equation without blinking. That was bad enough. But then Sutton sent me the list. It came 3 weeks after the dinner. A text message, not even a phone call. Sutton sent me a text that said, and I wish I was making this up, "Hey Ollie, Joe and I are getting the lake house squared away. Here's a list of approved visit dates for next year. Let me know which ones work and we'll get you on the calendar." Approved visit dates. He sent me a list. A literal, numbered list. Like a dentist's office. There were 6 weekends spread across the year, none of them during prime summer, and each one came with a little note like, "Porch furniture will be stored, please don't rearrange, and please strip beds and run dishwasher before leaving." There was even a line at the bottom that said, "No pets, no exceptions. Jolene is redoing the floors." I read it twice. I sat with my phone in my hand and read it twice because I genuinely could not believe that my brother, the kid I used to catch fireflies with on that same porch, was sending me visiting hours for my own family's house. Like I was a tenant. Like I was some acquaintance being granted access to a timeshare I didn't even own a piece of. I didn't respond. Not right away. I called Waverly. She listened, and then she said something that cut right to it. She said, "Oliver, they're not giving you visiting hours. They're telling you your place in this family, and it's at the bottom." She was right, and I think I'd known it for years but kept finding ways to excuse it. Every birthday where Sutton got the bigger gift. Every holiday where my parents drove 2 hours to see Sutton's baseball games but couldn't make it to my engineering showcase. Every time my mother introduced us to someone and said, "This is Sutton, he's in real estate," and then turned to me like she was remembering I existed and added, "And this is Oliver, he does computers? Engineering? Something with numbers. Something with numbers. I designed structural systems for commercial buildings." But sure, Mom. Something with numbers. After 3 days of thinking it over, I didn't send a long message. I didn't call a family meeting. I didn't make a speech. I just blocked Sutton's number. Quietly. Completely. And then I went about my life. Now, I need to be honest with you here. Blocking him felt both liberating and terrifying. Because when you cut off family, even family that's treated you like an afterthought, there's this voice in your head that says you're the problem, that you're being dramatic, that you should just swallow it and show up with a smile and be grateful for your 6 approved weekends and your dishwasher instructions. That voice is loud, and it sounds a lot like your mother. But Waverly kept me steady. She didn't push me to do anything. She just kept saying, "You get to decide what you're willing to accept." And I decided that I wasn't willing to accept being a footnote in my own family. For the next month or so, things were quiet. My parents didn't call, which told me everything I needed to know. They weren't checking on me. They weren't wondering why I hadn't responded to Sutton's list. They were probably relieved I hadn't caused a fuss. That's the thing about being the easy kid. People get used to your silence and mistake it for agreement. Then Thanksgiving came around. Now, every year, Thanksgiving at my parents' house was a production. Loretta cooked for 2 days straight. She made the turkey, the stuffing, the green bean casserole, 4 kinds of pie, and this cranberry sauce recipe she got from her grandmother that honestly tasted like sweetened battery acid, but nobody had the nerve to say anything because it was tradition. Sutton and Jolene always showed up around noon, and I usually arrived around 1 with whatever I was asked to bring, which was always rolls. Every year. Just rolls. Sutton brought a $40 bottle of wine and got praised like he'd hand-harvested the grapes. I brought rolls and got asked why they weren't warm. This year, I didn't go. I didn't call. I didn't text. I just didn't show up. Waverly and I cooked a small meal at my apartment. She made this incredible roasted chicken with rosemary, and I made garlic mashed potatoes that were, if I'm being humble, some of the best potatoes in the tri-state area. We ate on the couch, watched a movie, and I didn't think about my family once. Well, maybe once, but it was brief. The call came the next morning. My mother. Not a text, an actual phone call, which meant she was either worried or furious. And with Loretta, there's about a 3% margin between those two emotions. Oliver, where were you yesterday? We waited. Your father carved the turkey late because we thought you were stuck in traffic. I told her I wasn't coming. She asked why. I said, because I'm apparently not family enough to have a key to the lake house, but I'm family enough to be expected at Thanksgiving? That math doesn't work for me, Mom. There was a long pause. Then she said, this is about the lake house? Oliver, that was months ago. You need to let that go. Let that go. She said it the way you'd tell someone to stop being upset about a parking ticket. Like the house where I'd spent every meaningful summer of my childhood being handed exclusively to my brother with a side of visiting restrictions was something I should have processed in an afternoon and moved on from. I told her I wasn't angry. I told her I was done. And there's a difference. Angry people yell and slam doors and come back. Done people just leave. She didn't understand the distinction. She started in with the guilt. How much work she'd put into the meal. How my father was disappointed. How Sutton had even asked about me, which I doubted because Sutton's idea of asking about me was probably something like, is Oliver coming? Because Jolene wants to use the good china. I told her I loved her, but I needed space. She said I was being childish. I said maybe, but at least I was being honest. Then I hung up. Over the next few weeks, I got a handful of texts from my dad. Gene is not a texter. His messages read like telegraph transmissions. Oliver, call your mother. Your mom is upset. This has gone on long enough. Each one felt like a little poke in the ribs, reminding me that in my family, my job was to keep the peace, not to have peace. I didn't respond to any of them. Christmas came and went. I spent it with Waverly's family in upstate New York. Her parents, Harlan and Rosalind, were the kind of people who asked you questions about your life and then actually listened to the answers. Harlan shook my hand and said, Waverly says you're good to her. That's all I need to know. No evaluation. No comparison. No ranked list of which son-in-law brought the better wine. Just acceptance. I almost cried at a Christmas dinner hosted by people I'd known for 8 months. That should tell you something about the bar my own family had set. By January, the silence between me and my family had calcified. It wasn't hostile. It was just empty. Like a room where the furniture's been removed. You can still walk through it, but there's nothing to sit on. And then something happened that changed everything. My firm got a massive contract. The kind of project that comes along once in a career. A mixed-use development on the waterfront in Pittsburgh, $42 million. And they wanted me to lead the structural engineering team. My boss, a guy named Coulter who'd been in my corner since day one, pulled me into his office and told me that this was my moment. He said, Oliver, you've been building other people's visions for 10 years. This one gets your name on it. I went home that night and told Waverly. She screamed. Like full, hands in the air, neighbors probably think someone won the lottery screamed. And then she looked at me and said, I think we should get married. I said, I was going to ask you that. She said, well, I beat you to it. Deal with it. We got engaged that night over leftover Chinese food, with no ring, no knee, and no plan. It was the best night of my life. And for the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about the lake house, or Sutton, or the list, or my mother's lemon meringue pie and all the bad news it predicted. I was just thinking about what came next. And for once, it looked really, really good. Now, I'd love to tell you that after the engagement, everything was sunshine and progress, and I never thought about my family again. But that's not how it works when you grow up being the second choice. That stuff doesn't just evaporate because good things start happening. It sits in the back of your mind like a low hum you can't quite locate. The waterfront project consumed me. 14-hour days, weekends at the office, conference calls with architects and city planners and contractors who all had opinions about load-bearing walls and seismic codes, and whether the lobby should have marble or polished concrete. I loved every minute of it. For the first time in my career, I wasn't supporting someone else's project. I was the guy. The decisions ran through me, and I was good at it. Not because I was the loudest person in the room, but because I was the most prepared. I'd learned a long time ago that if you can't be the favorite, you'd better be the most competent. Turns out that's actually a better strategy in the long run. Waverly and I set a wedding date for September. Small ceremony, nothing extravagant. We picked a vineyard about an hour outside Pittsburgh that had this beautiful stone terrace overlooking the valley. Waverly's family was handling most of the planning because Rosalind, her mother, was the kind of woman who could coordinate a military operation disguised as a garden party. I just had to show up, say the right words, and not trip walking down the aisle. Felt manageable. The question everyone kept asking, of course, was whether I was inviting my family. Waverly never pressured me either way. She just said, "Whatever you decide, I'll stand next to you." Which is exactly the kind of thing that makes you want to marry someone immediately on the spot. I thought about it for weeks. Part of me wanted them there. Not because I needed their approval, but because I wanted them to see what I'd built without them. The career, the woman, the life. Is that petty? Maybe. But I think there's a difference between wanting revenge and wanting recognition. I didn't want to hurt my parents. I just wanted them to look at me and actually see me. Not the other one. Not the one who does something with numbers. Me. In the end, I sent one invitation. To my parents. Not to Sutton. I wrote a short note with it that said, "I'd love to have you there. This is important to me." I didn't explain the situation with Sutton. I didn't rehash the lake house. I just extended the invitation and left it at that. My mother called 3 days later. She said she and Dad would love to come, but that it would be hurtful not to invite Sutton. I told her that Sutton and I weren't speaking. She said, "Well, that's between you two. But he's your brother, Oliver." I said, "And I was his brother when he sent me a list of approved dates to visit my own family's house." Where was the family loyalty then? She didn't have a good answer for that. She said she'd talk to my father about it and get back to me. She never got back to me. They didn't come to the wedding. Let me say that again so it lands properly. My parents chose not to come to my wedding because I didn't invite the brother who had treated me like a stranger with a reservation. They picked Sutton. Again, as always, the sun doesn't share the sky with the lamp. The wedding was still perfect. Waverly looked like she'd been carved out of moonlight and good decisions. Harlan walked her down the aisle, and I swear the man was trying so hard not to cry that his face looked like it was solving a complicated equation. Rosalind handled everything with the precision of a Swiss watch. My best man was Coulter, my boss, who gave a speech that managed to be funny, touching, and mildly inappropriate all at the same time, which is exactly what you want from a best man. I missed my parents that day. I'd be lying if I said otherwise. But I didn't miss them enough to let them use my wedding as leverage to force me back into a family dynamic that had been hurting me for 30 years. There's a difference between missing someone and missing the version of them you wish they were. After the wedding, things accelerated. The waterfront project hit a critical phase, and I was managing a team of 23 engineers. The city council was breathing down our necks about timelines. The general contractor was behind on the foundation pour, and there were about 6 different problems happening at any given time that all felt like they were going to end my career. But I kept my head down and worked through every single one of them. Coulter told me once that the mark of a great engineer isn't that they never have problems. It's that they solve problems so quietly that nobody realizes there were problems in the first place. I took that to heart. By summer, the project was ahead of schedule. The developer, a guy named Emmett Trask who had more money than personality, flew in from Chicago to tour the site. He spent 40 minutes with me, asked about 15 technical questions that most developers wouldn't even think to ask, and then shook my hand and said, "You're the real deal, Oliver." 2 weeks later, his company offered me a consulting contract for their next 3 developments. The kind of contract that had a number on it that made my accountant actually gasp audibly during a phone call. Waverly and I bought a house. Not just any house. A 4-bedroom craftsman in a neighborhood I'd driven through for years thinking, someday. Someday turned out to be a random Tuesday in August when our realtor called and said the owners had accepted our offer. Waverly painted the front door yellow because she said every good house needs a yellow front door. I didn't argue because she was right, and also because I'd learned that Waverly being right was less a pattern and more a universal constant. I was happy. Genuinely, deeply happy. And the weird thing about being happy after a long stretch of being overlooked is that it feels almost suspicious at first. Like you're waiting for someone to show up and tell you there's been a mistake. That this life was meant for someone else. Someone more like Sutton. But nobody showed up. The life was mine. I'd built it. Brick by brick, decision by decision, early morning by late night. And then, in the way that life has of delivering irony with the timing of a comedian, I heard from Sutton. Not directly. Through my dad. Gene, who hadn't spoken to me since the wedding non-invitation, suddenly called me on a Tuesday evening. His voice had that gravelly, uncomfortable tone he gets when Loretta has told him exactly what to say and he's reciting it from memory. Oliver, your brother needs help. The lake house is in trouble. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the universe has a sense of humor that borders on sadistic. The house they gave to Sutton. The house I wasn't good enough to co-own. The house I needed approved dates just to visit. That house was in trouble. And suddenly, guess whose phone rang? The lamp in the corner. That's whose phone rang. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I said, tell me what happened. And I listened. And what I heard was a story so predictable that I could have written it myself with my eyes closed. Here's what happened to the lake house. Sutton and Jolene, in their infinite wisdom, had decided to renovate it. Not just a fresh coat of paint and some new curtains. I'm talking a full gut renovation. They ripped out the original kitchen. They tore up the pine floors that Grandpa Hank had installed himself in 1978. They knocked out a wall between 2 bedrooms to make a primary suite, because apparently the house where 3 generations of our family had slept comfortably wasn't luxurious enough for Jolene's vision board. The renovation was supposed to cost about $80,000. It ballooned to $160,000, then $200,000. Sutton had taken out a home equity loan against his own house to fund it, and when that ran out, he put another $40,000 on credit cards. Jolene, who talked a big game about real estate but had apparently never actually managed a construction project, kept changing the plans. New countertops. Different tile. Oh, let's add a deck. Actually, let's extend the dock too. Every change order was another $5,000 or $10,000, and the contractor they'd hired was the kind of guy who said yes to everything, because every yes was more money in his pocket. And then the contractor disappeared. Just gone. Mid-project. He took their last progress payment, something like $35,000, and vanished. Left the house half-gutted. Exposed framing. No functioning kitchen. 1 working bathroom. The beautiful porch that used to lean charmingly to the left now leaned aggressively to the left because they'd messed with the foundation supports during the renovation and hadn't shored them back up. Grandpa Hank's lake house looked like a crime scene. On top of all that, Sutton's real estate business wasn't doing well. The market had cooled, his commissions were down, and he was now sitting on roughly $240,000 in combined debt between the lake house renovation and his own mortgage. Jolene's family, the ones who supposedly knew everything about property and investment, had apparently offered zero financial help. Turns out it's easy to talk about equity when it's someone else's money on the line. So Gene calls me, the son they didn't invite to the decision, didn't include in the ownership, and didn't bother attending the wedding of, and asks me to help. The audacity was almost beautiful in its symmetry. I told my dad I'd think about it. And I did think about it. For about a week. But I wasn't thinking about whether to help Sutton. I was thinking about how to help myself. See, here's what my father didn't know. I didn't just have a good salary anymore. The consulting contracts from Emmett Trask's development company had put me in a financial position I never expected to be in at 34. Waverly and I had savings. Real savings. The kind that makes your financial advisor smile instead of wince. And I had connections. My work in Pittsburgh had introduced me to contractors, inspectors, real estate attorneys, and property specialists who actually knew what they were doing. I called a real estate lawyer named Sullivan Park. Sully, as everyone called him, was a guy I'd worked with on the waterfront project when we hit a zoning dispute. He was sharp, efficient, and had the kind of calm demeanor that made you feel like everything was going to be fine even when it absolutely wasn't. I told him the situation. He asked me one question: "Do you want the house?" I said yes. Not for revenge, not to prove a point. I wanted it because it was Grandpa Hank's house and it deserved to be taken care of by someone who actually cared about it. Not someone who saw it as a renovation project for social media content, which, by the way, Jolene had been posting progress photos of the renovation on her pages until the contractor ghosted them, at which point the posts mysteriously stopped. Sully laid out the options. He said the cleanest path was a direct purchase. If Sutton was drowning in debt and the house was half destroyed, he might be willing to sell, especially if the alternative was losing it to creditors or letting it rot. But Sully warned me that family deals are messy and I needed to be strategic. So I made a plan. Step 1. I had a property inspector I trusted, a woman named Delaney Voss, go assess the house. She drove up to Raystown Lake on a Wednesday, spent 4 hours there, and came back with a report that made me want to cry. The structural damage from the botched renovation was significant. The porch supports were compromised. The plumbing had been partially ripped out and never reconnected properly. There was water damage in the basement from a drainage issue the contractor had created and never fixed. Delaney estimated the cost to properly finish the renovation and repair the damage at around $120,000. She also estimated the current market value of the house, in its present condition, at about $90,000. Less than half what it would be worth if it were intact. Step 2. I called Coulter, not for business advice, but because he was the closest thing I had to a mentor and I needed someone to gut check me. I told him what I was thinking. He listened, then said, "Oliver, are you buying a house or buying closure?" I thought about it and said, "Both." He said, "Then make sure you negotiate like it's business. The closure comes after." Step 3. I talked to Waverly. She knew how much that house meant to me. She'd heard the stories about Grandpa Hank, about the dock, about the fireflies, about the summers that shaped who I was. She looked at the numbers, looked at me, and said, "Let's get your house back." Have I mentioned I love this woman? Because I really love this woman. Step 4. I reached out to Sutton. Not through my parents. I unblocked his number and sent him one text. "I heard the lake house is in rough shape. I'd like to talk about it. Just us." He called me within 20 minutes. And for the first time in over a year, I heard my brother's voice. He sounded different. Tired. The confidence was gone. The Sutton who'd sent me a list of approved visit dates was not the Sutton on the phone. This Sutton was scared. He told me everything. The contractor, the debt, the credit cards, the fights with Jolene. He said they'd been talking about selling the house, but couldn't find a buyer because of the condition it was in. He said Jolene's family had basically told them they were on their own. He said he hadn't slept properly in months. And here's the part that matters. He didn't apologize. Not once during that entire conversation did he say he was sorry for the list, for the approved dates, for the fact that our parents gave him the house and cut me out. He talked about his problems, his debt, his stress. He never once acknowledged that maybe, just maybe, the reason I was hearing about this at all was because they treated me like I didn't matter until they needed me to. I didn't point this out. I didn't need to. Not yet. I told him I'd like to make an offer on the house. He went quiet. Then he said, "You want to buy it?" I said, "I want to bring it back to what it was. Grandpa Hank's house. But I need to own it to do that." There was a long pause. He said he'd talk to Jolene. I said, "Take your time." And then I waited, because I knew exactly how this was going to go. Sutton was going to wrestle with his pride for a few days. Jolene was going to do the math and realize they were out of options, and eventually the phone would ring. It rang 4 days later. "Okay," Sutton said. "Let's talk numbers." I smiled. Not because I'd won, but because Grandpa Hank's house was finally going to come home. I had Sully handle everything. He drew up a purchase agreement that was clean, fair, and completely airtight. I offered Sutton $95,000 for the property, which was $5,000 above Delaney's assessed market value given its condition. I wasn't trying to lowball my brother. I wasn't trying to humiliate him. I wanted the transaction to be legitimate, and I wanted him to walk away with enough to at least start digging out of his debt. Sully included a clause that required Sutton to disclose all outstanding liens and any remaining contractor obligations. Turned out there were 2 liens from materials suppliers the contractor had stiffed. Sully got those resolved before closing. Sutton signed the papers on a Thursday afternoon at Sully's office in Pittsburgh. I was there. Jolene was not. Sutton told me she didn't want to come, which I interpreted as Jolene not wanting to watch the house she'd gutted for her renovation fantasy get handed over to the brother-in-law she'd spent years subtly undermining. Can't say I blamed her for sitting that one out. When Sutton signed the last page, he looked at me, really looked at me, and for a second, I saw the kid I used to catch fireflies with. The kid who used to dare me to jump off the dock. The kid who once ate an entire jar of peanut butter on a bed and then threw up behind the boathouse while I laughed so hard I couldn't breathe. He said, "I messed this up, didn't I?" I said, "Yeah, you did." He nodded. Then he said, "I should have split it with you from the start. That list I sent you, I don't even know why I did that. Jolene said we needed boundaries with the property, and I just went along with it. I should have told her no. It wasn't a full apology. It was more of an admission. But it was the first honest thing Sutton had said to me in over 2 years, and I'll take honesty over polish every single time. I didn't hug him. I didn't tell him it was all water under the bridge. Because it wasn't. Trust isn't a light switch. You can't flip it back on just because you feel bad about turning it off. But I shook his hand, and I meant it. Then I got to work on the house. I hired a contractor named Boyd Whitfield, a guy Delaney had recommended who specialized in restoration projects. Boyd was in his 50s, had hands like catcher's mitts, and spoke in short, declarative sentences that made you believe every word. He walked the property, looked at the damage, looked at me, and said, "Whoever did this should be embarrassed. But she's fixable." The renovation took 5 months. I drove up to the lake every weekend to check progress, and most weekends Waverly came with me. We'd sit on borrowed lawn chairs where the porch used to be and eat sandwiches while Boyd's crew hammered and sawed and slowly put Grandpa Hank's house back together. I didn't try to modernize it. I didn't try to turn it into something it wasn't. We restored the kitchen to its original layout. We found pine flooring that matched what Grandpa Hank had installed and put it back down. We rebuilt the porch with the same kind of cedar planks and, yes, it still leans a tiny bit to the left because some imperfections aren't flaws. They're character. We fixed the dock. We replaced the plumbing. We insulated properly, updated the wiring, and gave the whole place a fresh coat of the same forest green paint it had worn since the 80s. When it was done, I stood on the dock at sunrise, the same dock I'd sat on the day after Grandpa Hank's funeral, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Total cost of the purchase and renovation came to about $215,000. The appraised value of the finished house was just north of $310,000. But the value wasn't the point. The point was that Hank and Della's lake house was alive again. Not as a real estate play, not as a social media backdrop, as a home. Now, here's where my parents come back into the story. Word travels fast when you buy a house from your brother, especially in a family where nobody talks directly, but everybody talks about each other. My mother found out about the purchase approximately 9 minutes after it happened, which means Sutton called her from the parking lot of Sully's office. She called me that night. The conversation went about the way you'd expect. "Oliver, I heard you bought the lake house from Sutton." "I did. I don't understand. Why would you do that?" "Because someone needed to take care of it, Mom. And the person you gave it to didn't." Long silence. Then, "That's not fair, Oliver. We didn't know the renovation would go wrong." "No, but you knew when you gave it to him that you were cutting me out. That was a choice. And now I'm making mine." She tried a few more angles. She said I was being spiteful. I told her I'd paid above market value and offered my brother a lifeline when he was drowning in debt that his own decisions created. That's not spite. That's generosity with boundaries. She said I was trying to punish her and Dad. I said I wasn't thinking about them at all when I made the decision, which was true, but clearly hit harder than anything else I could have said. Eventually she asked, "So what happens now? Are you going to send us a list of approved visit dates?" And I have to give her credit for that one, because it was the first time my mother had ever acknowledged what Sutton's list actually meant. She knew it was cruel. She'd always known. She just hadn't wanted to deal with it. I told her, "No, Mom. The door is open. It's always been open. That's the difference." That was about 4 months ago. Here's where things stand now. The lake house is finished. Waverly and I go up most weekends from May through September. We bought a canoe. I fish off the dock in the mornings the way I used to with Grandpa Hank. The frogs still sing at night, and the screen door still creaks, and the whole place smells like cedar and lake water, and something I can only describe as home. My parents came up for a weekend in August. It was awkward at first. My dad sat on the porch and didn't say much, which is standard Gene behavior. But at one point he looked out at the lake and said, "Hank would have liked what you did here." That's the closest thing to emotional expression Gene has ever produced, and I took it for what it was. My mom brought her cranberry sauce. It still tasted like sweetened battery acid. I ate 2 servings and told her it was delicious, because some lies are acts of love. Sutton came up once. Without Jolene, he and I took the canoe out and didn't talk much. We just paddled around the cove the way we used to when we were kids. When we got back to the dock, he said, "I missed this." I said, "Me too." And I meant it. We're not fixed. We're not back to normal. I don't know if we ever will be. But we're talking. Carefully. Honestly. Like 2 people who are building something new instead of trying to patch something broken. As for Jolene, she and Sutton are still together, but I hear things are strained. I'm not going to pretend that doesn't give me a tiny bit of satisfaction, but I'm also not rooting for their failure. People make choices. Choices have consequences. That's not revenge, that's just physics. Waverly is pregnant. Found out 2 weeks ago. She told me by handing me a tiny fishing rod and saying, "You're going to need another one of these." I stood in our kitchen with a 4-inch toy fishing rod in my hand and cried like I was auditioning for a daytime drama. We're already talking about spending summers at the lake, teaching our kid to fish off the dock, catching fireflies on the porch, doing all the things that made me who I am in the place that made me who I am. Grandpa Hank told me once that the lake house would always be there for me. He was right. It just took me a little longer to find my way back. But I'm here now. The porch still leans to the left. The dock still creaks. And the door is open. It's always open. That's the difference.